You ever had the reality of responsibility hit you in the face? Because ever had that moment where there's a moment you feel a weight, you see the impact? I had that moment after Caleb, our oldest son, was born. Caleb was in the NICU for 2 weeks after he was born with some breathing issues. He would pause his breathing, his oxygen saturations dropped down in the 70s, and so we had to go home on oxygen, and he was on that for about 6 to 9 months. We had this 75-foot cord or tube, oxygen tube, that went through our whole house. So we had to carry him around because he had to have that on him all the time. He also had to have a pulse ox monitor that was measuring his oxygen saturations 24 hours a day, and that thing would beep incessantly, especially when he was sleeping at night. And so, but about 6 months after he was born, all of the bills started rolling in, right? From birth, hospital day, for every doctor that walked in the room, looked at an x-ray, breathed in a certain direction our way, right? we had a bill for all of it. And Jamie and I were trying to navigate this little baby with the monitors and the oxygen tubes and making sure he's breathing okay. And now we got these bills starting to roll in. And I was working at a small church as a youth pastor, and all that responsibility hit me in that moment. And I started to think back with my mom and dad and all the responsibility that they had with me and my sister. My mom, she was sick with MS. She wasn't able to work. And I thought, how did they do it, right? How did they make it? I was like, it's just me and Jamie and just one little baby. He had a wife that was sick, 2 kids, and, a house, all that. We were living in a duplex. My dad had a mortgage. I was like, how did they do that? And then I sit there and it hit me. I was like, oh yeah, my dad worked 3 jobs. That's how they did it, right? Now, God, of course, working, okay, that's a given, but and our church family helped, but he worked 3 jobs all the time. He had a regular job at the bank. He was a courier, a mail clerk for a bank there in town, but then my dad and I, we would go back to the bank every night, Monday through Saturday, no Sundays, but Monday through Saturday, and we would clean from 6:30 to 8:30 at night. And I was 14 when we started doing that, and then whenever I got my own job at 16. So I did that for 3 years with him every night, cleaning the bank. To be able to, the bank would pay him time and a half whenever he would do the cleaning. My dad and I, we mowed yards. We had about 5 or 6 yards that we mowed. We worked at the concession stand at the ball field. My dad would keep score at the ball field as well to earn a little money. I remember him going on Wednesday nights. He wouldn't be able to take us to church because he would have to go out, and he went around all the Dallas-Fort Worth area collecting money for these galas and the balls that they would have, and he would go and collect money. This was way before Cash App and PayPal, okay? He had to go to their house and get the money, so he would do that to earn a little extra money as well. But he did all of this because of the responsibility that he had to take care of his family, to take care of the financial responsibilities he had to pay the mortgage and the gas bill and the electrical bill for groceries, right? And I thought back in that moment, I thought about all the ways that he worked to make sure that we were okay, to take care of us. He had a wife that was sick. He had a son and a daughter, house bills, cars, all that to keep going. As I said, I just had one wife, and I lived in Utah at the time, so that, anyway, the only one I've had my whole entire life, right? All right, one kid and me, and think about that responsibility really weighed in. And I think back to my dad and the responsibility he had, and he made it happen. He made it happen through hard work and diligence and love, leading us to follow God. And I look back at his example and know that he was able to do it. I could feel that I could do it as well. Even with all those responsibilities just looming. Sometimes they're a little scary, right? But they're doable if we get to work. If we put forth the effort, God will bless it. And I think we can all relate to that moment when we feel that weight of responsibility. We feel, everything kind of seems out of balance, and then you think back like I did, how did my folks do this? How did they make it work? And you think, how am I going to make this balance out? The sickness, can we make it better? Is there medicine? Is there a cure? The bills, can we pay this? Well, we have to make payments. How is it going to balance out? How will that fit in the budget? Do we have a budget? And we feel the pressure to make it work, to make the right decisions, because if you make the wrong decisions, what's going to happen? And we're trying to balance all this risk with the responsibilities that we have. We feel this as we've been discussing the responsibilities, we've talked about over the last several weeks. There's responsibilities we have, like our responsibility of God, and we have our health, we've got finances, we've got family, we have all these big responsibilities that nobody else can do for us. You can only budget your money. You can only spend time with God. You can only take care of your family. You can only take care of your health that we talked about last week. And then we throw on top of that all the extra responsibilities like work, practice, school, trying to help the kids with homework, right? It starts all adding up, right? And we start having all these, they get thrown in, these extra responsibilities. And how do we get them? Sometimes we just want to drop them all, right? I'm not going to do that because they'll go everywhere. But sometimes we do. We just want to drop them all because of all the pressure, because of all the weight. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. Is if we drop one of these responsibilities like work, it bounces and it comes back up. We can re-grab that one. Someone else maybe picks it up, right? A responsibility. Maybe you got to get the kid to practice. Somebody else helps you out with that one, right? But we have all these responsibilities. And whenever we have all these extra ones, sometimes it's hard to hang on to all of this stuff. And we talked about whenever we have all these and they overwhelm us, we could drop one of these. These don't bounce back, do they? These big responsibilities, these precious ones that are made like this glass ball, we drop it, there's going to be a dent. There's going to be a scuff. Could even shatter. When we think about these that we have so much, and you're like, there's some of these you're like, man, I just want to put it over here and not worry about it. To put that responsibility down. Sometimes we want to hide it like that financial responsibility. Let's not worry about that one right now, right? We want to put these down. I want us to look at a story that Jesus gave. Jesus was telling a story that we have recorded in the Bible about responsibilities, about the responsibilities that we have. And the big picture of this parable is a parable is a story that Jesus would give. A parable is an easy way to think about it as an earthly story that has a heavenly meaning, has a larger meaning. And the larger meaning is our Christian life. But he uses everyday examples like finances and responsibility. If you have your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 25. We're going to start in verse number 14. You can turn that, and it's going to be on the screen up here as well. Matthew 25:14 says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to their own ability. And immediately he went off on a journey. Then he who had received 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who received 1 went and dug it in the ground and hid the Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them." Verse 20, "And so he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, 'Lord, you've delivered me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them.' His Lord said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord.' Verse 22, he also who had received 2 talents came and said, 'Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them.' His Lord said to him, 'Well done, and good, faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord, or of your Lord.' Verse 24, then he who received 1 talent came and said, 'Lord, I knew you are a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed, and I was afraid, and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours.' But the Lord answered and said to him, 'You wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed, so you have ought to deposit my money with the bankers, and at my coming you would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him, give it to him that has 10 talents. For everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for the time to be able to come and study, Lord, your word, study a passage, a story that you gave. Lord, I pray that you'd help us to glean the truths from this story. Help us to be able to apply it to our life with the responsibilities that you've given us. And Lord, that we will move further and closer to you. In Jesus' name, amen. So right here in verse number 14, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, called his servants and delivered goods to them." So as I said, that parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's talking about the kingdom of heaven has some symbolism. So the kingdom of heaven is referring to the Christian life, the life that we're to live for God here on earth and in the future in heaven. The servants here is talking about people, us. And then the goods, those are the responsibilities that we have, like talents, of abilities, whether to play a musical instrument, to sing, whether it's to, we have all different types of things that we could do to be able to, work, abilities, our wealth, life in general. And then it talks about traveling to a far country. This is Jesus. It's a reference possibly to Jesus leaving this earth. He's leaving us with responsibility, and he's going to give out responsibility to us that we're to take care of and be able to give back to him when he returns. So what does he give? Verse 15 says, and he gave one 5 talents, and to another 1 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. So a talent is a large sum of money. It's about a half of a lifetime's worth of wages. So this is a lot of money. In our numbers today, it would be in the millions. So he gives this guy 5 talents. Now Jesus, he's the master storyteller, so he's trying to grab their attention, the people that are standing there listening. When he says 5 talents, they know this is a lot of money. And so he's given him 5. And especially in a culture of that day, it was hand to mouth, right? If you didn't work that day, you didn't eat that day. And so this amount of money would change a life. It would change a generation, right? This is a large responsibility. And so he gives another one 2, that's still a good amount, and another one 1. You think about your salary. If somebody dropped half of your work life salary in your lap today, that would be significant, right? What do we work? Maybe 16, you might start a little bit earlier, you go to 65, maybe you push it a little bit further to put more into retirement. So, in that time period, about half of that is about 25 years. You think about 25 years of your salary just dropped into your lap and say, here, do something with this. That's what these guys have. That's what the story is telling us. So the verse says they were given according to their ability. So what does this say? This is saying that we are not all the same. They were different people with different skill sets, different experiences, different cultures. Culture impacts a lot of how we take care of our responsibilities, especially our money. So it's not expected that everyone can handle the same responsibility, but the same effort is going to be expected. Not so much the same responsibility, but the same effort needs to be put forth. So we're to be working, putting forth what God has given, putting forth effort in what God has given us, waiting on Jesus' return. That's kind of the scope here. So verse 16, it says that when he had received, the one that received 5 talents, so the guy goes away, right? The master goes away. He goes on a long journey after he distributes these goods to them. And while he's gone, that guy that received 5 talents, he went and traded with them. And this traded means that they took what they had and they went and worked it. Traded means diligent to work. That he was doing what he was expected to do to produce. Many ways to do this. Now, it doesn't tell us how he did it, but it tells us that he did, that he went out and made 5 more talents. He went out and produced 5 more of a half of a lifetime of money. We said that's about 25 years worth of finances, 1 talent. This guy had 125 years worth of finances. Can you imagine that? That's a ton. And so then he goes out and produces another 125 years worth of finances, 250 years of income. I say this to help you gain the perspective of like they were in the first century of what the hard work here is, the effort, the production. Not so much of money. This is not health and wealth prosperity gospel that you send me this amount of money and God's going to send this back to you. No, I want you to understand that this is responsibility here. You think about that, a large amount of money, that's a lot of responsibility. So this 5 talent guy has a lot of responsibility. And we know people like this, right, that are high capacity people. It just seems to always work their way. It seems effortless on the outside looking in, but there's a system, there's a strategy, and God will use people like this if they're willing. Then you have the guy with 2. He produces 2 more. He doesn't produce less than the 5 talent guy. He actually does the same. It's 100% return on investment. The 2 talent guy levels up. He grows from 2 talents to 4 talents, right? His experience has increased, his knowledge, his ability has all grown. And he's not angry that he doesn't have 2 talents, or he only has 2 and the other guy got 5. He took the 2. He was responsible, what was given to him, responsible for what he had, and he worked it and he produced with it. We just say, don't we get frustrated sometimes whenever we see someone else further down the field than you are? Maybe financially, you're like, man, they get to have this and that. Or maybe relationally, somebody's marriage or somebody's relationship with their kids, you're like, man, I wish we were that place. Or spiritually, man, I wish I knew these things. I wish I could be able to handle it whenever difficulties come, and I would handle that better than what God wants me to. But we're all at different levels. But your responsibility is to grow. That's the key. Your responsibility is to grow, is to get to the next level. Comparison will never help you to move forward. It's negative. It's about what you don't have instead of looking at what you do have. Instead of looking at what you don't have, why don't you focus on what you do have? What's right in front of you? Because folks, envy, that's a negative motivator. Because once you get it, maybe you're envious and you work hard and you get it, then you get it, and then you look further ahead where that person that you're envious of, they've got more, and then you're still without. See, the 2-talent guy doesn't do that. He doesn't say, well, I didn't get 5 talents, so since I didn't get that, what's the point? No. He went out and he did what he was able to do according to their ability. He did the same work, 100% production. He doubles what he has. Look at verse 18. But then he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid the Lord's money. He sits on the responsibility given to him. The expectations are there like the others. The others, from their actions, we can see that what they were supposed to do, to go out and produce, to be responsible. This guy buried it. He has no chance of losing it, but he has no chance of making profit. There's no growth. And as I said, there are expectations to use it, to work it, to do something with it, that responsibility that had been given into him. For us, how many times have we buried a responsibility? Right? We have these different responsibilities in our life, our time with God, finances, our health. We talked about that last week, right? Friends. We have these different responsibilities, and they're urgent. Then we have these other things that start to come in our life, right? The urgent demands, work, got to get the kids to practice, we've got to make dinner, right? We've got to do homework. We're trying to fit it all in, right? There's sometimes we're like, man, I've got all these extras. Can I just take one of these? Just put it over here. That time with God, the gold one, we just want to hide it because we got all this stuff going on. And if we get any more, we're not going to be able to handle it. We're not going to be able to hold on to it. And so we bury it, so to speak. We forget about it. We're like, oh, it's in a safe place over here. I know where it is. Just like this guy, he knew right where it was. He went and dug it up and said, here you go. Here's what you gave me, and you can have it back. But a lot of times we want to take that responsibility, those finances, and let's just put it over here for a minute because I want to go do what I want to do. We'll put it on a credit card. We'll deal with that later, right? We hide it. We put our family over there, right? We put it over here. You know what? I'll do it whenever I got more time. I'll do it when I retire, right? We'll spend time together when we retire, and then we'll have all the time to be able to do all those things. And we're just going to put it right here. I know exactly where my family is. They're okay. They can do it. They're fine without me. We'll throw the ball later. Well, guess what? Later, time keeps going, doesn't it? They grow up. They don't want to throw the ball anymore. And we've forgotten about it. We've buried it over here. And when it does slow down, and really it doesn't slow down, we know it only gets faster, more busy, more demanding. Like I said, we put our finances over here. We'll buy now, pay later, right? We'll worry about it later when the bill comes in, when it's compounding interest of 22% month after month. We want that instant gratification instead of that delayed gratification. We want it instant. We want that shiny object. We want those clothes. We want to go out. We want that meal. Instead of delaying it and that we put money back. We save. We wait. And so we bury that financial responsibility. Even those here in our story. Look at verse 19. It says, after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. This long time is, we don't know how long it is. And what it's referencing to is whenever Jesus would return. It could be a reference to the judgment seat in heaven whenever we have to answer to God for everything that we've done, all the responsibilities that he's given us. The point is, we're going to have to answer for our actions, what we did, what we didn't do. But in the meantime, we're to put forth effort with the responsibilities that God has given us, with our family, with our finances, with our friends, with God, right? We're to take all of these to be able to do what we're supposed to, the responsibilities that God has given us. Now it's time to settle accounts, to see what we did with what we were given. Look at verse number 20. It says, so he received 5 talents, came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. So the guy with 5 talents, he goes, I've got 5 more now. Here you go. The master's pleased. He says, well done. There's approval here that has happened. Approval of the effort that was put forth. He calls him good. That good is about his character. That he was good. You know, character is what we do whenever nobody's looking, whenever nobody's around. And that's what he's talking about. He goes, your character was good. I've been away and you stayed faithful. You stayed diligent. You were responsible and not passive. You were responsible with what I gave you instead of being passive and pushing it off. He says, you've been faithful over a few. Now those hearing this would have been taken back by this statement, right? Faithful over a few, 125 years worth of wages. You think about that. A few, how much is a many, right? He says, I will make you ruler over many things. Ruler means responsibility increases. Then the master tells him to enter into the joy of your Lord. It's approval, coming into a deeper relationship, part of the family. He's no longer a servant or a slave. He's in. And the audience would have, at the first century, would have got this, that he's included now. He's a part. He's not on the outside. He's on the inside. You're a part of the family now. You have an inheritance. Verse 22, he also would have received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them. The Lord said the same thing. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. Enter into the Lord, the joy of your Lord. So again, it's not about how much, the dollar amount. It's about being faithful with what you have. He did 100%. He took what those 2, that's what he had, and he worked it, doubled it. Output was the same. It was 100%. Verse 23 says, this is the great teaching here from Jesus. He's helping us to understand you don't have to be the one with the most. You do the most with what you have. That's what he's telling us. You don't have to always be the one with the most. All the toys, all the money, all the whatever. It's just do with what you have. Do the most with what you have. The master's telling him the same thing. He's saying, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. This shows a relationship with God. Lord, I want you to see it's not about works-based. It's not that, okay, you produced 100%, you doubled what I gave you, now I love you. No, it is love, it is trust, it is shown in the expression by their obedience. These guys were showing their love through their obedience. Their actions showed their faith. James chapter 2, verse 18 says, but someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. James is saying my faith is evident because of what I do. There's a relationship. Our love, our faith is backed up not just in words but in actions. That's what John says in 1 John chapter 3, verse 18. He says, my little children, let us not love in word or in tongue. Let's just not say, oh, I love you. Oh, I follow God. Oh, I want to do these things. But he says, do it in deed, the actions. He says, do it in truth. That is for God. Verse 19 says, and by this we know that we are of the truth. He's saying that we are saved. And we are shall assure that it's real in our hearts before him. See, the 5 and the 2 talent guys' actions showed their relationship with the master, with God. And then verse 24. Then he who received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you've not sown, gathering where you've not gathered seed. Verse 25, he says, I'm afraid. I went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, you have what is yours. What does this guy do? He starts off with excuses. John, go back to the 24. He starts off with excuses here. Look at this. He says, he didn't say, here's your talent, here's what I did with it. He says, Lord, I knew you were a hard man. He starts off, he's blaming him, right? He says, And he might have been looking at those other two guys like, oh, we were supposed to do something with those, you know? But he couldn't say that. He knew. That's why he starts off with these excuses. He says, Master, you're a hard man. You're mean, you're wrathful, you're angry. He's blaming the master. It's your fault that I didn't do anything with this because I was scared. You reap where you don't sow. That's proof. I've seen it. That's what he's saying. His view of the master of God was limited. He chose for it to be limited. Because with that view, he had an excuse for disobedience. He claims ignorance. I didn't know. This still happens today. We hear people say, God's just angry and he's wrathful. He's just this warmonger, right? Look at all the aftermath. But they only choose to look what happens after someone blasphemes or someone disobeys or after rejection. They say, God allowed this, God took them out. But if you go back and study, you read the whole story. As Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. There's a choice. There's a sin to disobey or to ignore. God gave instruction to Pharaoh back in the time of Moses to let his people go. What did he do? He said, no, it's not happening. This is almost 2 million people. This is my workforce. There's no way I'm letting them go. And he sends this plague. And he says, let them go. He's like, no. Then he sends this plague and that plague. And then he winds up chasing after. He finally lets him go and he chases after him and he dies in the Red Sea because he wanted what he wanted. And we look at that as, oh, God, let that happen. You know, it was his choices that built up to that, even the hardening of his heart. Ananias and Sapphira is a story in the New Testament in Acts. They said that we're going to give this dollar amount to God. We're going to sell this possession and whatever it might be. And then as they sell it, they look at it and are like, ooh, this is a chunk of money, right? We could get new floors with this, right? You know, let's look at the story. Acts chapter 5, verse number 1. It says, but a certain man named Ananias and with Sapphira, his wife, sold a possession. We don't know what it is, but they sold something, and they kept part back of the proceeds. Now, earlier they committed. People were giving. They were selling land, selling different possessions, bringing it to the apostles. They're trying to take care of the poor in Jerusalem, those that were Christians that were being ostracized. They're trying to help. So they had a heart to help, but as they see it, verse 2, they keep back part of the proceeds. They're like, man, we could have something nice with this. Says his wife also being aware of it and brought a certain part, not all of it, and laid it at the apostles' feet. Verse 3, Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back a part of the price of the land for yourself? While it remained, was it not your own? And after you sold it, was it not in your control? Why have you convinced this thing in your heart, or conceived this thing in your heart? You've not lied to men, but to God. He's saying you committed to make this and give this to God, and now you're wanting to hold a part of it back. You're lying to God. He made a choice. Verse 5, then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. That was it. We want to look at that as like, we want to blame God that this guy died, but it was his choice to disobey. So verse 25, he says, I was afraid. Fear keeps us from many opportunities. It keeps us from victories many times because we're scared of failure, so why start? Fear keeps us from reconciliation. I don't want to say sorry because then they might say sorry back and they might have to change because God's working in their heart, and we fear then that we might have to change if they change. We have to look at our own selves. We're afraid to make a move. You know, this guy that had the one talent, he might have said, you know, it's just not a good time right now. The market's not doing really well. The timing's just not right. He's afraid to make that move. But how many times have we said that? The timing's just not right. I should say something. I'm not going to say it. I should do something. There's just not enough time. Usually that's a great one, right? There's just not enough time. There's not enough time to get out of debt. There's not enough time to work on my marriage. There's not enough time to get that degree, to finish it. In his book, 9 Things You Must Simply Do, Henry Cloud has a chapter called Play the Movie. He's talking about the situation that you might be in to play the movie out. What's the ending going to be? Can you have an alternative ending? And he was asking this lady about, he was meeting with her, he's a psychologist, meeting with her. She's like, I really want to get my law degree. I hate the job that I'm in. I really want to be able to move forward. So he asked this question. He says, do you plan to be alive 3 years from now? And she said, yes, I plan to be alive. He goes, okay, 3 years from now, that date is coming, period. It's not optional. 3 years will come and you will be alive. He says, I repeat, 3 years is not optional. It is going to come to pass. You will be here. And since that day is going to come 3 years from now, on that day, what do you want to have? Do you want to have a law degree enabling you to do something you love, or do you still want to be hating your life? He said, play the movie out. The reason she hadn't gone and got the law degree yet was because it was the time it was going to take. She said it was too long. What did he say? It was going to be 3 years. But he says 3 years are going to pass. She said it's not about the 3 years that seems long. It's where I will be in 3 years, still hating my life. Or she could be 3 years closer to that law degree. I just finished my master's degree a month ago. It took me a long time. It was one class at a time. COVID was mixed in there, right? With pastoring a church, I have my family. I read this book 12 years ago. And that thought resonated with me because I wanted to get my master's degree then. And it rang true in my life. And that's why I said the same thing. It's going to take too long. I can't quit my job and go and move to Fort Worth and go to seminary. You can take those things that God wants to give you and hide them. Say, it's too much, right? But then I started one class in 2016. Like I said, it was a long time. And I took another class. And then I took another class. COVID happened. I took a pause. Then I took another class, so forth and so on, and I finished. Folks, for you, what is it going to be? Your health? Might be 30 minutes on the treadmill just to start there. It might be taking that credit card, your finances, and cutting it up, and then start paying an extra $20 or an extra $50 on it a month. Maybe it's having a garage sale. Maybe it's selling a car. Maybe with your family. Take your spouse on a date. Start somewhere. Where will you be 3 years from now? If you look at where you are now, in 3 years, where are you going to be with those things? Let's play the movie. See, this guy says here, he goes, look, here's your talent. I have it. No harm, no foul, right? Just like you gave it to me. That's what he says. Look at verse 26. But the Lord answered and said to him, whenever he said that, he says, you wicked and lazy servant. He was wicked because he was disobedient. He refused to do what was expected. What was his responsibility? He didn't use it for its intended purpose. He was lazy. He was passive. He didn't want to work. Man, I'm so glad my dad wasn't lazy. He had to work, and he had to work hard. This one talent guy, he wanted to do what he wanted to do, not what the boss said, not what the master said, not what God said. The thought could be, why work hard, right? I'm not going to benefit. I don't get anything out of it. He has plenty. He gets it from places that he doesn't even work anyway. Why should I put forth the effort? But who's that about? That's about himself. It's selfish. He says this, verse 27, the master says, you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back with my own with interest. So we see there's an expectation with his money. Don't even worry about money. Let's talk about responsibility. But he was passive. He didn't care. He let it go. So verse 28, it says, take the talent from him and give it to the man that has the 10 talents. And you might be thinking, well, that's abrupt and that's mean, right? No, there was an expectation there. It'd been a long time. It says a long journey. This one talent guy, he did nothing. What's going to change now? This is where boundaries and consequences come in. So they remove the responsibility. See, poor stewardship leads to losing. This parable has the element of money in it. So, and stewardship with responsibility. So let's apply that for a moment, okay? I've got some budgets here I want to pass out. Have some of you guys help me with, brother, can you pass out a few of those? Can you pass out in the middle? Then we'll do some over here on the side. Peyton, will you pass some of these out? I want everybody to get one. Family, you can get one. If you're a college student or high school student, get one, okay? You need to start this now. Now, hold on, I didn't get one. Okay, you got two, okay, good. All right, so this budget's up here on the screen as well. And so I want you to take a look at this budget because God expects us to be responsible with what he's given us. Our relationships, right? Our relationships that we have, our health, we talked about that last week, our relationship with God, and finances. He expects us to be a good steward of what he's given us. And we can gather from the parable, it's all his, right? Even the finances. Right here he says, the guy that had the 1 talent, he didn't do what he was supposed to. He says, give it to the guy with 10. God is in charge of all of it. He owns it all, and God expects us to be good stewards, to be responsible with what he's given us. And one of the big ones is money. Why? Because this can turn into an idol. Why? Because we trust it. This is what gives us the things we need, right? Food, entertainment, position, prestige. But we have to decide, am I going to trust God, or am I going to trust my wealth and myself? So as you look at this budget, one of the ways that you trust God, you see right there, you put in your gross income. It's everything before taxes, before retirement, all of that. Put your salary, your interest, dividends, other incomes, you put those things first. What's number one? Nobody wants to say it. It says tithes and giving, okay? And what is that? So now God's not saying pay me first. It's not about paying. It's an offering. It's about putting him first. It's about trust. God, I want to trust you first. It is not easy because sometimes you look at your giving and you're like, whew, that's a lot of money. That's some flooring, right? That's another car. But putting him first is showing that we trust him. We trust him with that, and we also trust him with the rest. That's what this is for, is to help us to organize the rest, to be able to get it and to show where our money's going, right? The 90% is still there. God's given it to us. We're still accountable. This is the budget that Jamie and I use. We track what we are spending on things. Jamie just told me last week, she goes, we need to sit down and talk about the budget. And I'm like, I hate talking about the budget, right? Why? Because it's emotional, isn't it? Because you're like, oh, we got to spend money on that, right? I don't know. I want to get a truck part, you know. But we got to go through. We got to make sure that we're taking care of all of our responsibilities. And this helps us. We can add it all up and realize, ooh, there's more month than money, right? Or we need to be able to reallocate a little bit more to retirement or to savings. We need to see what we need to be able to do. But that budget is important. It helps us to see what reality is. Remember we said reality is our friend. Where your money's going, do we make enough to work? But what I want you to get, I believe what Jesus is saying right here is the life that God has provided demands responsibility, not passivity. The life that God has provided you, and that's everything. It is your relationship with God. It is your relationship with your family. It is your health. It's your finances. It's all of it, right? And it's hard to juggle. It's hard to balance all of these things. But this is what God has given us. And we need to take responsibility for it and be responsible for what God has given us. God expects us to be responsible. Look at verse 29. It says, for to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But for him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. For everyone who has, it's all these responsibilities. It's all of these things. He's saying, if you got all these, you got your health, you got your relationship with God, you got your family, you got your money, you got all your friends. It's all of these things that he's given us. Are we using them correctly? Are we using them wisely? Are we using them to glorify God? As we do, the Bible says we'll have more responsibility, more opportunity, because God can trust you. We see that with the 5-talent guy. We see that with the 2-talent guy. But with the 5-talent guy, he's the one that's given the talent that the guy buried. If you're responsible, or if you're not responsible, if you're passive, he says you'll lose it. You'll lose your finances. You'll lose your health. You lose your family. You lose your friends. Because they're not being responsible. The life God has provided you demands responsibility, not passivity. Then I want to look at verse number 30. Now, verse number 30 is tough. But here's the thing, we can't skip the tough stuff just because it's tough. Verse number 30 says, and cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is where those that want to focus on the negative of how God is so angry and he is wrathful. But folks, we see that this is a result of a choice. The 1-talent guy chose to reject God and his instructions. He chose to not be a part of the family and do what was expected. He refused to be used by God. Hence, there's no relationship. And if there's no relationship, then there's no welcoming in. This is a reminder that there are choices and we have responsibilities. We have opportunities to follow God and to engage with what he's given us, what he's asked us to do. See, the life that God has provided you demands responsibility, not passivity. So let me ask you, what are you being passive about in your life? Is it your finances? Is it your faith? Is it your relationship with God? Is it your family? Or we're being passive with these? See, this parable is more about relationships than it is finances. It's more about relationships than running a business. We need to be responsible with what God has given us, the relationship to God. So let me ask you, what or where has God called you to be obedient? Where has he asked you to make a move towards him? Is it just having that relationship with God? Salvation? No longer being selfish? No longer life having to be on your terms? That you'll finally submit and say, God, I'm wrong and I've sinned and I ask you to forgive me of my sins. I want you to come into my life and I want you to change my life. I want to live my life for you. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe you're saved, but it's your finances. You've been saying, you know what? This is my money. I made it. I'm going to do what I want to do with it. And God's saying, I want you to be responsible. I want you to trust me. To be able to do that. Putting him first in your finances. Folks, let me tell you something. Malachi 3 challenges us. The prophet was speaking to the Israelites, and God's speaking through him, and God says, you've robbed me. And they said, where have we robbed you? He goes, let's use the example of finances, of tithing. Because you haven't been giving the way that you should. You haven't been trusting me. And he says, he challenges them. He goes, you give. He goes, I challenge you to give. And he goes, see if I do not pour out onto you more than you can even take in. You're like, I would like to have some of that, right? But that's what he'll do. Folks, I can give you testimony after testimony after testimony, things I saw with my folks, myself, in my own life, that God will bless and he will give you more than you can think of. It might not always be dollar for dollar. Malachi 3 talks about the devourer stays away. Folks, I've seen things last longer than they ever should have. I didn't tell this story first service, but I'm going to tell you real quick, and I've told it before, and it's a car illustration, so if you don't know about cars, it's okay. I'm going to explain it to you, all right? My dad was probably one of the best things he ever taught me. I love working on cars. My dad finally got enough money. We built up enough money to be able to work on the car. Needed to change the plugs, the spark plugs that make the motor run. There's plug wires that go to it that runs the spark to all those spark plugs to ignite the fuel and the air and the motor. And on that, there's a rotor or a distributor cap, and that distributor distributes the electricity to those spark plugs, okay? And so that distributor, on the top of it is a coil. A coil is what produces the spark. And he knew it hadn't been running right, but it's been running. And he pulls the cap off. And he sees on the bottom side, it's supposed to have this point where it goes down on this rotor, and that rotor rotates, and it sends the spark. See all the things you're learning? It's awesome. Anyway, so it sends that spark. Well, there's that point He turns it over and he looks at it, and I'm watching him. He's just staring at it. And what he's staring at is how God has worked in his life. He turns it over and he shows it to me. He goes, see that? There's a hole. Actually, it wasn't that big. It was that big in the bottom of that coil. The coil is only about this big. There's a hole that big in the bottom of it. He's like, son, there's no mechanical way this car should be working. He goes, if I put this back on, it probably wouldn't work.